In 2014, a grounds manager at an Atlanta golf course did what most people would consider routine stewardship. He hired a mapping specialist to scan the soil near the fifth green. Ground-penetrating radar doesn't care what a place is called today. It reads the past as geometry, rectangles of disturbed earth, lines where air pockets remain, patterns where a human decision once insisted on order. The scan lit up with graves. Dozens of them, close enough to the putting surface that a good chip shot could land where someone's ribs once rested. Reports at the time described roughly 86 unmarked burials at North Fulton Golf Course in Chastain Park, an accidental cemetery, invisible until the technology made it visible again. Site turn 0 search 0, turn 0 search 4, turn 0 search 1 2. If you've seen the aerial maps, the most unsettling part isn't the number. It's the arrangement. The bodies are not scattered like a disaster site. They are aligned like a plan. Two clusters, separated by a gap where a road used to run an ordinary road, doing what roads so often did, dividing the living, and then dividing the dead. Contemporary reporting connects the burial ground to Fulton County's Almshouse era, when the county operated segregated facilities on West Weeuka Road and buried people who died there without headstones, without names on display, and often without anyone outside the institution ever knowing where they were placed. Site turn 0 search 0 search 121. Atlanta isn't an exception. It's a recognizable pattern. Once you learn the shape of it, you start seeing the same outline across the country. A park where children play, a highway right-of-way, a college campus lawn, a new subdivision, a stadium. Underneath, rows of people who vanished into county systems that were designed not just to manage poverty, but to make poverty disappear from public sight. From the early 19th century into the mid-20th, nearly every county in America ran some version of a poor farm. In some places it was called an almshouse, a county home, a county infirmary. The name shifted, the logic stayed. If you were poor, old, disabled, mentally ill, orphaned, chronically sick, or simply in the way, the county could send you to a facility outside town. You would live there, work there, be counted there. Official language often didn't treat you as a resident or a patient. You were an inmate, someone confined for a condition the state insisted was a personal failure, even when the condition was simply that the economy had no safe place for you. Before the poor farm system solidified, some towns used an even harsher solution: public vendus, where families who couldn't support themselves were effectively auctioned out, their labor assigned to the lowest bidder in exchange for food and shelter. The practice wore the costume of community thrift, but it functioned like a reward system for whoever could extract the most work for the least care. Even reformers who supported order in public relief described the cruelty openly. The incentives were backwards, and the poorest people were the currency. Poor farms were promoted as a humane upgrade, less spectacle, more stability. But they carried the same bargain into the next century. Survival traded for autonomy. Visibility traded for control. And then there is what happened when people died. A county home could operate for decades, cycling thousands of lives through its wards, its barns, its kitchens, its locked rooms. Death was inevitable, sometimes constant. Most of these institutions developed potter's fields, cemeteries, for those whose families couldn't pay, couldn't claim, or weren't informed. The graves were often numbered, sometimes logged in ledgers, but rarely marked in the way a community cemetery marks its dead. When the institution eventually closed or changed hands, the burial ground was the easiest thing to forget. A fence removed, a map misplaced, a ledger boxed and shelved. Then the bulldozers arrived. Milwaukee County, Wisconsin, is one place where the record is unusually blunt. Researchers and local historians have documented multiple burial locations connected to the county's institutional grounds, along with a formal burial register that runs from the 1880s into the 1970s. Cited turn 1 search 1 turn 1 search 9. The numbers are large enough to make your mind slide away from them for self-protection. Thousands buried in sections of county cemetery land. Excavations recovering hundreds and then thousands of individuals from areas that had been treated as blank space. Site turn 1 search 5. Turn 1 search 9. What shows up again and again in these histories isn't only neglect. It's the administrative calm around neglect, how a system can notice something is wrong and then proceed as if noticing is the end of the responsibility. A cemetery can sink and shift. Coffins can surface. Bones can appear after a storm. And the response can still be, essentially, to avert the eyes. That instinct, look away. Move on, returns in story after story. It's why, when the subject breaks through into public attention, the reaction online is often a jolt of disbelief, followed by something darker, recognition. People comment that it explains why a family line goes quiet in the 1890s. They share screenshots of census entries that list a relative's occupation as simply pauper. They trade tips on how to search county death records, how to request old Almshouse ledgers, how to look for county farm and burial location fields. Under videos about poor farm cemeteries, you see the same rhythm. I didn't know this existed. Followed by, wait, I think this happened here too. Zeit turn to search. 1. Turn to search. 1-5. Montgomery County, Maryland, carries another layer. Not only poverty, but racial terror. Local histories and planning documentation describe the county's poor farm cemetery as a place of unmarked burial for many people whose names have been lost. And they note that 2 of the county's known lynching victims, John Diggs Dorsey, 1880, and Sidney Randolph, 1896, were reportedly buried there without markers. Site turn 1 search 2 turn 1 search 1-3. Think about that sequence. A mob kills someone. The state fails to protect them, fails to prosecute effectively, and then the body is absorbed into the same anonymous disposal system as the indigent dead. Not even an acknowledgement. Just the quiet efficiency of erasure. In recent years, debates over land use in that region have brought renewed attention to the old grounds, where development proposals collide with the question no one wants to answer. How many are still there, and where, exactly? Site turn 1 search 2. In comment sections and community threads, you can watch people swing between moral clarity and logistical anxiety. They deserve dignity. Alongside, how do we even find them now? Both reactions are real. Both are part of what happens when a burial ground is allowed to become a problem instead of a promise. Back in Atlanta, the same tension plays out in miniature. A golf course functions because the ground is supposed to be predictable. Greens are engineered. Hazards are intentional. But a cemetery beneath a fairway is unpredictability of the deepest kind. Not danger in a sporting sense, but a rupture in the story a city tells about itself. Reporting on the Chastain Park discovery emphasized how the grave's location aligned with the history of Fulton County's Almshouse facilities, and how the survey evidence suggested separations that tracked the segregation of the era. Site turn 0 search. 00 search. 121. This is what the system did. It built a second geography, one that didn't have to be admitted publicly, because it was designed to be out of sight. If you want the moment where the machinery becomes visible, look at Philadelphia in the 19th century, where poor relief, medicine, and the market for bodies braided into one pipeline. Histories of the Philadelphia Almshouse, often called Blockley, describe a potter's field that became a major target for grave robbing and a source of cadavers for medical dissection. Site turn 1. Search 1. 1. The fear wasn't irrational. Even administrators acknowledged that the practice of body snatching created dread among inmates, because the boundary between care and harvest was thin and porous when you were poor and confined. When public outrage exposed body snatching rings, especially those that preyed on black cemeteries, the legislative solution in many states was not to protect the dead equally, but to reroute the supply legally. In Pennsylvania, the Anatomy Act of 1883 formalized the distribution and use of unclaimed cadavers for medical science through a state-regulated system. Site turn 1 search. 8 turn 1 search 4. The stated goal was to prevent trafficking and grave robbing. The effect, in practice, was to ensure that the bodies most available for dissection were the bodies with the least social power. Those who died in institutions, those whose families couldn't assert a claim, those whom the state defined as unclaimed. On social platforms today, when people learn about anatomy acts, the reaction is often a kind of shocked calculus. So the answer to illegal grave robbing was to legalize it just for certain bodies. That's the point where moral language catches up to what the paperwork already knew. It wasn't random. It was a policy choice. Site a turn. 1 search. 8. Now go north to Monroe County, New York, where the ground itself forced a reckoning. Highland Park in Rochester is famous for lilacs and spring festivals, a place designed to feel like softness. But local reporting and historical markers document that the park sits on land associated with the county almshouse era, and that in 1984 routine work uncovered human remains leading to archaeological excavation and reinterment of hundreds of individuals. Site turn 0 search 1 turn 0 search 5 turn 0 search 9. Accounts describe 305 bodies excavated and studied before being reburied at Mount Hope Cemetery, with the likelihood that additional remains still lie beneath the park. Site turn 0 search 1 turn 0 search 5-1. When people on local forums talk about it, the mood is rarely sensational. It's more like a slow grief mixed with civic embarrassment. We've been picnicking over this. We've been taking engagement photos over this. We've been holding festivals over this, and we didn't know. The park isn't cursed. The park is honest. It's the story we told about the park that was incomplete. Middlesex County, Massachusetts Tewksbury shows the same system at its most grotesque edge, where rumor and testimony blur into a scandal large enough to reach a governor's office. Harvard's Countway Library exhibits and social welfare histories preserve material related to the 1883 investigation into the Tewksbury Almshouse, a facility founded in the 1850s for paupers. Site he turn 0 search. 3 he turn 0 search. 7-0 Governor Benjamin Butler accused the management of profiting from the dead, including the sale of bodies to medical schools, and the investigation collected testimony about how cadavers arrived for dissection and who supplied them. Site turn 0 search 3 turn 0 search 7. The details are harrowing not just because of what might have happened, but because of what the testimony reveals about the era's assumptions: that pauper bodies were material, that institutionalized infants could arrive in lots, that a price per corpse could be discussed as casually as a shipment of hides. The scandal becomes a kind of X-ray of the culture. What people found shocking, what they found plausible, and what they were willing to tolerate until it was spoken aloud in a hearing room. Site turn 0 search 7 turn 0 search 3. Then there is Cook County, Illinois, Dunning, where the scale is so large it stops feeling like a cemetery and starts feeling like a hidden city. The Cook County Cemetery, associated with the Poor Farm and institutional complex, is commonly estimated at around 38,000 burials, and a memorial park today marks only a portion of what was once a much larger burial ground. Site turn 0 search 2 a turn 0 search 6 a turn 2 a search 1-3. Sources describing the site note that official records list thousands of burials, and that only a fraction have been identified by name through later documentation work. Site turn 0 search 2 turn 2 search 1-3. The online conversation about Dunning often sounds like someone trying to say unthinkable without using the word. People share images of the memorial discs and the old dedication stone. They swap links to name databases and cemetery pages. They argue about development and responsibility. And then inevitably, someone posts, "I live there." That's when history stops being a documentary and becomes a map of your own neighborhood. Across these places, a question emerges that the archives can't answer cleanly. How did a system so widespread end? And why did its cemeteries become so easy to erase? Part of the answer is not moral progress, but economics. When the Social Security Act passed in 1935, it reshaped incentives across American social welfare. The creation of benefits paid to individuals changed how counties calculated the cost of care. And over the following decades, many poor farms were closed, reorganized, or replaced by different institutional forms. The closures did not automatically include a plan for the cemeteries. If the facility land became valuable, and it often did, once cities expanded, the burial ground became, in the blunt language of development, a complication. There's a particular cruelty in how ordinary the erasures look afterward. A grocery store, a playground, a landfill, a stadium, a highway project. You can visit these sites and feel nothing at first, because the surface is designed to feel like nothing happened there. That's the function. That's the point. And yet the dead persist in the only way the system ever allowed them: as data. a register line, a death certificate field that says county farm, a census entry that records a person once as a pauper and then never again. Site turn 1 search 1. People who fall into genealogical gaps who vanish between one census and the next, sometimes reappear when descendants learn how to search institutional records. That's why modern social media threads about poor farms so often turn into impromptu workshops. Someone posts a county name in a decade. Strangers respond with search terms, archive links, and cautious sympathy. Sometimes the tone is angry. Sometimes it's reverent. Sometimes it's purely practical. But the pattern is the same. People trying to reverse a disappearance that was engineered to be final. Ground-penetrating radar has become a recurring character in these stories. Not because it is magical, but because it is indifferent. It doesn't care if a place is a park now. It doesn't care if the city would rather not talk about what came before. It renders the old decisions visible again. And then it hands the living a question. What do you do when a landscape you thought you understood turns out to be layered with unmarked lives? Some communities respond with memorials, markers, reinterment, databases, ceremonies. Some respond with silence. Most respond with a mix. A plaque here, a promise there, and then long stretches where nothing happens because acknowledging the dead demands time, money, and a willingness to see the people the system trained you not to see. The part that doesn't fit neatly into a museum exhibit is the arithmetic. If nearly every county ran a poor farm or county home for more than a century, then the number of people who lived and died inside that system and were buried without durable public memory is not small. It's not even moderate. It is a scale that makes the phrase unmarked graves feel insufficient because it suggests a local anomaly instead of a national infrastructure. And that brings us back to the fifth green, where the discovery started as maintenance. It didn't begin with a confession or an anniversary or a civic campaign. It began with someone wanting to know what was under the soil so he could take care of the land. That is how this history re-enters the present. Not as legend, but as a construction plan. A survey, a trench, a routine job that hits bone. The radar keeps finding what it was never supposed to look for, not because the bodies were hidden with sophistication, but because a country decided certain people didn't need to be remembered in the first place. The technology is new. The moral test is old. If your family tree hits a dead end in the 1800s, if a relative slips out of the records and never returns, consider the possibility that they were not lost by accident. They may have been processed by a system whose purpose was to make poverty invisible, and if they died inside it, they may still be there beneath a place that looks ordinary, because ordinary is exactly what erasure tries to look like.